All right, hello, welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to talk about understanding C#. We're going to give context to what is the .NET framework, and then what is this newer platform called the .NET Core. I also want to give context to the overall architecture of .NET applications, and also just kind of give a brief overview of the growing popularity of building .NET applications here. So let's jump into it. So here, let me just say a few things here about C#, .NET Core, and then .NET Framework. C# is one of the, I would say, it's probably the most popular language that Microsoft manages or kind of give guidance to. It's an object-oriented language, and what that really means is that when you're coding, you're structuring out your code around real-life objects. Nouns, person, place, things, and sometimes ideas. There's a suite of C languages. There's C++, which is what C# is modeled after, what you see here. And so there's C#, there's C++, and Objective-C. You may have heard of that language. But C# is, I would say, definitely by far is one of the more popular languages that Microsoft manages. One of the other languages that they manage is called F, and then Visual Basic, and there's some other languages that are a little bit older that a lot of people don't use anymore. So there's C#, and that's what we're going to basically write our code in. But then let me just say a few words about .NET Core and then .NET Framework. So .NET Core is the latest platform that Microsoft has released for us to build applications. .NET Framework was the previous platform, and it's still used a lot to build applications, but more people are now gravitating to .NET Core due to it being cross-platform. So what does that mean to be cross-platform? One of the things is that you're able to now host your website on different servers, whether it's Windows, Linux, or you're also able to build cross-platform, right? So if you're on different operating systems, you can build .NET applications. The other cool thing about .NET Core, which is one of the cool things about it, is that it has this new command line tool that allows us to run some commands and to work a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more faster. So .NET Core is the latest platform, but .NET Framework was the previous platform, but they're both still heavily used. One of the benefits that .NET Framework have over .NET Core currently, which is slowly changing, is that .NET Core was not able to do desktop applications. And so if you wanted to do a desktop application, you had to do the .NET Framework platform. But as of recently, even this year, .NET Core now has the ability to do desktop applications. So everything that you can do within .NET Framework, .NET Core is able to achieve as well. So let me talk about architecture, .NET architecture. And a lot of people don't really dig this deep into understanding what is behind building a program. A lot of people typically just jump into coding, but I like to give context to some of the pieces that we're downloading into our machine, and what is happening behind the scenes when we actually write our code and compile it, and what resources we need to do that. So what if you wanted to build an application? Where do you start? What do you need to download? What are some of those resources? So that's what I want to talk about briefly here, is the architecture that what we need to have to build an application, a .NET application. So there's three things. You need the common language runtime, you need the base class library, and that's referring to either .NET Core, which is the latest cross-platform, or .NET Framework, which is the previous popular framework or platform. And then there's other managed libraries And here's a good visual, and I'll say more about these three parts here. So here's a visual of those three parts. Down at the bottom here is what we call the CLR. You have the compilers, and the compiler essentially translates or transpiles your C# code or whatever language you're writing in into machine language, so that the machine can actually understand what you wrote or interpret the information from your code. And then you have the language and then the runtime components. The next layer is the base library, which is this third component here, right? And we just talked about the .NET Core and the .NET Framework. So the .NET Core is, like I said, the latest platform that was released by Microsoft, and then .NET Framework is the previous platform that you can use to build applications. And so essentially, to kind of sum this up here is that it's basically code that Microsoft is giving you to build your application. And so you don't necessarily start from scratch, but typically you will start from a API or a library to begin to build your application. And this really just makes our lives a little bit easier. And so it's a bunch of different classes that the developers of the language have already created, so that you can just begin to scaffold your application rather quickly. The Mono class library has to deal with Xamarin, where you can actually do iOS applications, Android applications, and you can write the code in C# and it would transpile into the various native languages of iOS and Android, or Java in this case. And iOS would be either Swift or Objective-C. But the cool thing here is that you get to write the language in C#, and then there's the various there's some functionality that allows it to transpile into the various native languages for those unique applications. And then, like I said, you have other managed libraries, and these are libraries that are on top of that are additional libraries that you have to install. So if you want to do an ASP.NET Core application, this is some more code that you would install on your machine to do a .NET Core application. If you wanted to do a Windows form, you would need to install the workload or install the code to write a Windows form application or WPF application. So let's go ahead and actually install some of this software onto our machine here. Now I'm working with Visual Studio Enterprise version 2017. You may have a later version, Visual Studio Enterprise 2019, and I will soon update my computer to Visual Studio Enterprise 2019, but you should still have access to this Visual Studio installer. So what we're going to do is we're going to download some of the information that we've seen here that we talked about. We're going to download some of the runtime components. We're going to download the base libraries and then the workloads for .NET Core. Like I said, we're going to, in my videos here, we're going to primarily focus on .NET Core applications. So we're not going to necessarily need anything from Xamarin or so forth, but the workloads that we would need to install or the code that we need to install will be in this green section. And then, like I said, we're going to install some base API libraries, and that's going to be the CoreFX class library, and then the corresponding CLR, which is the compiler language and the runtime components. So let me bring that Visual Studio installer back up. If you're having a hard time finding this Visual Studio installer, just go ahead and search for it at the bottom of your the search key on your toolbar at the bottom of your computer. Just type in Visual Studio installer and you should see an application pop up. Just go ahead and click on that icon and you should get to this window here. You may have a view that says you need to update the installer or update Visual Studio Code. Go ahead and update the application, and then once you update it, it would look like it would bring you to a view that you see here that I'm looking at here currently. Once you do that, go ahead and click on More, and what we're going to do is we're going to modify and begin to add the workloads and some of the things that we talked about in the PowerPoint here. What I want you to install here is I want you to install. I did say we're not going to do the .NET framework, but here, just for good use case, we're going to actually install .NET desktop development. So make sure you click on .NET desktop development. I want you to install ASP.NET and web development. So click on that. Here's the workloads for Xamarin. Like I said, we're not going to install that here, but if you did want to take a stab at building an Android app or an iOS app, you would click on mobile development with .NET, but we're going to bypass that. And what I'm going to have you do is also, this is an extension tool that goes for Visual Studio Code, which is the text editor that we're going to be using. I'm going to have you install Visual Studio Extension Development, and this is what's going to allow us to use some of the .NET Core functionality or some of the tools within Visual Studio Code. And then also go ahead and download .NET Core cross-platform development. And this is actually the platform that's going to actually give you the CLR and the base library for .NET Core. And you'll see to the right here some of the things that they'll install once you click on .NET Core. So those will be the three components that we would install on our machine. And like I said, just to kind of do a quick overview, that's what we just talked about here, right? You need three components. You need the common language runtime, which has the compiler. You need the base class library. In this case, we're going to do primarily most of our development is going to be in .NET using the .NET Core platform. And then in this case, in this class, we're going to be doing a lot of console applications, but more specifically, ASP.NET Core console applications. And then we're going to also dibble and dabble in ASP.NET ASP.NET Core web applications. So go ahead and make sure you have those workloads and those libraries installed on your machine, and we'll pick up with the next video. A few more things before I end this video here. If you click on, if you go to visualstudio.microsoft.com/downloads, we're working with the Enterprise Edition. I'm going to be working with the Enterprise Edition. Like I said, you may have Visual Studio 2019 installed, and I'll soon update my machine for that. And there's a free trial here, but also just know that if you didn't have access to the Enterprise Edition, you have your own personal computer, you can download the Community Edition, and it's free. It pretty much has some of the same capabilities as Enterprise, but nonetheless, there is a free edition of the IDE of Visual Studio 2019 that you can install on your machine. There's also a couple free resources here. If you go to .NET Microsoft.com, this URL here, and then if you want to build an ASP.NET Core website, they have some books and some resources that allow you to walk through, and some really valuable resources here that you can tug at to help further your learning. So let me go ahead and pause the video, and we'll pick up with beginning to write our application, how to actually start an application and begin to write our code.